I'm very excited about this specific workshop because they gave me free choice to talk about whatever I wanted. And so I thought about storytelling. I love storytelling. And honestly, I believe that every one of you has a story. Maybe not just one, but you have some kind of story that you could share to help others heal or to change the world, change people's way of thinking. I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll feel like you are able to share your story and that you'll be able to change the world through your story. First, I'd like to talk about why it's really important for you to be able to share your stories and other strategies for telling stories well. We'll start at the beginning of the story. The cave writing. You know that story, right? Cavemen and the writing on the walls. I'm actually not going to start there. But I am going to start with my story that started here at RIT. You see a picture of my parents on the left and right. They were RIT NTID students. And if it were not for NTID, I would not be here. My parents met here. My dad was an oral deaf student who did not sign, and my mother was a graduate of a school for the deaf. And they were kind of an odd couple, but they met over a game of Scrabble, and the rest is history, and that involves me. So thank you to RIT for that great story. I have a deaf brother. I grew up in a deaf family. We have such a rich narrative. Have you heard of the 6 degrees of separation? I just wanted to propose that in the deaf community, we have 3 degrees of separation because we have this strong access, and I feel like we can access lots of different people through our 3 degrees of separation. I think that might be a good graduate thesis for anybody to look into if the deaf community actually has 3 degrees of separation. So growing up, my parents always told me stories, and I ended up going to a sleepaway camp. We didn't have email back in the day, and so one mistake my mother made was she didn't tell anybody that I needed stories before bedtime. And so I ended up telling the counselors there that I needed a story, and I would not go to sleep until they told me a story. They would offer like Cinderella, but I would be like, all right, I already know that one. And so I would force them to come up with new stories. But I really love hearing stories from other deaf adults, deaf doctors, business owners, presidents of organizations, because I like having access to their rich narratives. And I fell in love with my parents' stories about their lives. And so I decided to go back to RIT, full circle, where it all began. And I realized that my parents' stories were not the same as the stories I was experiencing as a student at RIT. I was trying to relive some of their experiences, but I realized that I needed to go on my own journey and my own path. And I met my other half here. We married. And I had a job. We had a house. We were all settled down at a very young age. Until now. Like I mentioned, I had the privilege and the opportunity to have a job and a house and a husband and our travel. We had all of our boxes checked, and we had everything that a new married couple would want. But we had something happen that we didn't expect. We had bought our house, and we decided that we wanted our kids to be able to go to very good schools. And so we moved to a nice place so they would have access to good schools. And when I was pregnant with my daughter, my husband and I were talking how we really wanted to sign to our child, because I know that we have deafness in our family. My husband was from a hearing family, and I was from a deaf family, and I knew that there was a potential of having a hearing child. And I have this memory of knowing that when you play music to the child in utero, they move around. And so I was preparing for a world with a hearing child. I did not have the experience of having my child move in the womb. And so I had my child, and the child had red hair. And I found out that my daughter is deaf. And it was fine. You know, I'm a deaf person. I have deaf parents, but I wasn't expecting to have a deaf child. The first people I saw in the community were not very encouraging. They told me about deaf schools and all of the problems that I might have. And everybody struggles after childbirth anyways. And so I had all of these negative experiences to go along with that. And I was looking at her. She was 2 weeks old. I was trying not to cry. And I know deaf people. I am a deaf person. But I didn't know what her life would be like. I didn't know if she would be able to read and write well. I didn't know if she would be successful. I was just trying to figure out what was going to happen to her. I need to sign to my deaf child. There was all these decisions that I needed to make as a mother, and I wasn't prepared at the time to do that. Technology at that time was different too, and I wasn't sure how I was going to raise a deaf child. So what I learned is that my experience as a deaf person is different than being a parent to a deaf child. And that we need to share stories in order to raise people's expectations. People are amazed that my daughter, my deaf daughter, could read Harry Potter at 6 years old. And I need to share that story so people see that it's doable. I need to share the story that deaf doctors have private practices. I worked with some leaders in government last week on disability rights, and I was talking to a blind woman and a woman who relies on a wheelchair, and I was encouraging them to tell their stories. The woman who's blind was doing an internship with disability policies, and she lived in the middle of nowhere in Texas, and she wanted to go to college, and someone told her that she needed to go to community college because she was not able to see her surroundings and she needed to stay where she was comfortable. But she ended up going to Notre Dame. She is currently a student at Notre Dame, and she had never been there. And so this is just a story of a blind woman going to Notre Dame. And another woman, the one woman who relied on a wheelchair, had the same struggles with somebody telling her that she could not go to the university she wanted to, and they recommended her going to a community college. And I said, you know, sometimes that's the same in the deaf community too. We're often encouraged to go to community college. But the three of us sitting at that table had a very similar experience in life. And I think we need to raise people's expectations. This woman in the wheelchair was a paraplegic, and she has traveled the world. The other woman, who is now a student at Notre Dame, is going to do well wherever she goes. The top businesses typically have a very clear message that they tell. They have a story. And data is important, but how much data is floating out there? We can't even really determine what to believe or not. We just need to understand the importance of the data. There's a governmental research that was on shrimp. And people are often wondering, why are we spending money on research about shrimp? So it's the Mississippi River. It's very polluted, and they are trying to determine the impact the pollution has on the shrimp. And so the point of studying shrimp is related to pollution, and we need the story to be able to share the data. So there are two types of stories: Martian and Sagan. Martian is like a fairy tale, something that is created with no time and place. Sagan is more like a legend, a story that's passed down. Do we have any stories like that in deaf culture, deaf community? I'm sure you can think of any story. You know the timber story? That's an example of Martian. Does everyone know the timber story? Does anyone not know? So in short, there's a tree and there's a person trying to cut the tree down. It will not come down. And they keep yelling timber, but the tree will not fall. Different people came up to the tree, yelled timber, and it still would not fall. Now a deaf lumberjack came up to the tree and he fingerspelled Timber, and the tree fell. So that's one of our stories. The Sagan story is more like a legend, like our history of when Laurent Clerc came to the United States from France. But so the point is that both types of stories can be used. It doesn't always have to be a personal story. It can be a story that just draws people in. For example, African tribes and Native Americans as well share stories just like this. The word diplomacy is used to develop relationships across cultures and different languages and borders. And really the point is to develop relationships through sharing stories. You can talk about food or... Is everybody familiar with the woman named Judith Heumann? She was a disability advisor. She did some mountain climbing.
There was a person with disabilities who couldn't board a bus, and so because of their struggle, she helped to advocate for them. And so she has included different people, international leaders, and different people to get involved with disability rights and policy.
So as a deaf person from a deaf family, I am able to connect with people from various countries and cultures just through diplomacy, because we're able to make the connections through storytelling, and by doing that, we can change the world.
Storytelling is really scientific, and scientists have researched the brain to see what's actually firing when storytelling is happening. If you're watching a movie, maybe on a lazy Sunday afternoon, you're on your couch and you're watching some comedy or whatever thing you're watching on TV, you fall in love with the characters. And so they've researched what's going on in your brain. And it could be that feeling, that experience that you're watching is something that you can relate to, and you can relate to it in your life. And so it's a way of connecting people. It's that feel-good dopamine release that you experience when you're watching stories. So the question is, why is it necessary for us to tell our stories? And it's necessary because we need to be seen as humans. I have a friend who's blind, doesn't sign, and we became very good friends, best friends. And people don't get it because they see us. They've labeled us as a deaf person and a blind person, and they've labeled us by all the superficial aspects of who they are, but they're not looking at us at the end of the day for who we are as humans. And so it's important to share a story that way. There's that famous narrative of the danger of one narrative. A woman by the last name of Nosy, Njozi is her last name. She showed a picture of Africa, and people were talking about what they thought about when they thought of Africa. They thought of huts, no electricity, etc. And this woman said that when she came to America, those were the stereotypes people had projected onto her, where she really was from a well-to-do, well-educated, middle-class family. And so that's why it's important for us to make sure that we have a rich narrative, narrative that represents not a community of one, but a community of diverse individuals, because narratives show the complexity and the beauty within the group. You know, we want the narratives of the people who are 100 down to the children's stories and every story in between. And that's the beautiful thing about storytelling, because you can have a voice at the table and you can represent the community and represent the world as it needs it. Diversity is incredibly powerful. Thinking about deaf space and the concept of deaf space becoming universal access. So it's through our role that we can be respected and that we can make positive changes for everyone. A good story is not about sharing it, but more about packaging it. Now, do you agree it's good to share stories? Yes? No?
Everybody's saying yes.
Anybody have a burning story they want to? I've got a project for you. Let's see, we'll start from your left. I want you in the audience to think about your story and turn to the person on your left and just share a story, 3 minutes each. And maybe it's a story that defines you, a story you just want to tell. Maybe an important moment in your life. Each person will have 3 minutes. Just go ahead and we'll have a little short group exercise in the middle of our lecture. I see some beautiful stories that are going on and on. They're just great. Okay, let's bring it back together. So how did it feel? How did it feel to share your stories?
Wow. It was great.
Feeling great? You're learning more? Did anybody feel it was awkward or hard or difficult to share your stories?
Yes. Yes.
But after you shared it, did you feel different?
Yeah. Jess was telling me all sorts of things, and then the story came, and I had to interrupt and watch you again.
Well, to continue a story would be a lot of fun. I was speaking with our interpreter who's on the stage with me, and he said, "Do you know what? He was my bus monitor when I grew up," and so that was his story that he shared with me. So that's the best thing about stories. Thank you. The biggest challenge when telling stories is to make that cross over any divisions that could happen because of culture or language. And so this is really important, because when people from different cultures come together, often there are interpreters or translators involved, and telling stories through an interpreter is possible. But the important thing is that you make sure that the interpreter is embodying the story that you want to tell. As you see the graphic on the slide, that you have the main idea, then you've got the sub-points, the sentences, and the words. And so you want to get to the point where the interpreter really understands those key words that you need to get across, and that the interpreter is getting the big picture, but also the details, the key words, and if you're including humor, the punchlines. Because sometimes, depending on the topic and depending on the culture, depending on the amount of processing time the interpreter needs. You need to make sure that the interpreter is included in the path you're taking in your story and your presentation so they can convey what you want. It was interesting. I was nervous to become a valedictorian when I was a younger person, but I was selected for that, and I wrote a speech, and I practiced and practiced, and I was working with the interpreter, and the interpreter asked me one question that really changed my whole perspective. Because I was thinking, why me? Why now? Why is this happening? And the interpreter asked me, well, how do you want to convey the word why? Do you want to convey the word why in an inquisitive way or in a questioning way? What emotion do you want behind that, and what kind of character are you trying to show when you're using that word why? That was a powerful question for me because it really made me think about what I wanted to communicate and why I was using the word why within that speech. So that's one example of thinking about the culture with whom you are connecting with, and then using the keywords and using the interpreter within that so you can get your story across. This is a picture, another picture about how I like to tell stories. Pictures can tell stories, poems can tell stories. Stories that are shown this way can speak for themselves, and so stories can be shown through art. Claire Cassidy is a photographer. She is one of the most talented deaf photographers I know. She saw a political situation that had escalated, and she decided to develop this campaign called Roar from the Heart, and it is deaf people with different words inscribed on their chest that represent that person. And she had a tremendous impact, not only locally in the deaf community, but a wider reach, and she got a lot of media exposure. But when you look at the art, it doesn't seem that they're deaf people. This is a human story that's being told. It's a universal story that's being told. And her art, she became recognized for the talent she has. And then she was recognized then later as, oh, and she's a deaf person as well. So it's important to use art to tell our story. And art is not limited to a specific medium. There are different ways to express art. It could be in architecture, it could be in computer coding, it could be in design and fashion. There are many different ways. Photography, landscaping. Now, when I was a major here at RIT, my major was professional technical communication, and I had graphic design courses. I also had a minor in IT, so I felt like I had a very balanced schedule. I had friends who were in graphic design, but I really wasn't involved with them that much, and I was more interested in marketing. And when I went on an internship, I was assigned a graphic design project that I had to develop a brochure, and I thought, wow, I really love this graphic design. Then I came back to RIT, and I finished my senior thesis, and it turned out that I became more of a graphic designer. And what happened was I realized that when I was young, when I was a kid, fresh out of college, I was deaf, and people didn't know that I really had the ability to do some very good intellectual work. But when I produced graphic arts, people could see the work that I did, and the actual design spoke for itself. It wasn't about me. So it was because of the art that I was producing that it spoke for itself, and then I was able to then move up the ladder. And so some things don't need language if you use art as a way to express the story, the way to express your talent and express who you are. You can have a story that has one specific point that you're trying to convey, or an actual narrative that you're trying to weave. And the most important thing when you're telling stories through art or through other media is that you're branding it and then you're amplifying it. using hashtags, using a diverse way to tell the story. You want to make sure that the story is inspirational and that the story will be connected to the people who are hearing it. So in this day and age, there are many different ways to get your stories across through hashtags, through, hashtag why I sign. That's one way. Music videos is another way. A friend of mine, Rosalie, who's an alum, she created that happy video from the happy song, and it went viral. News media outlets picked it up. And even reporters started to use the ASL sign for happy, and there was just, the perfect storm that video really connected with people. Other videos as well, for example, on vlogs like ASL Nook. If you look at that vlog, the characters might be talking about a holiday, say Halloween or something, or some other experience that really is universal, but then they connect it with sign language. And then there are products as well where as the graphic on the slide shows, to sign is human, and then it uses the HU as if it were a chemical symbol. So these are all ways to tell stories through different types of media. Campaigns are another way, as well as publications, and then social media presentations, etc., as the slide says. Each are important. Now, I mentioned the 3 degrees of separation in the deaf community as my hypothesis or theory, so here's a slide on that. So I think about the world population, 5% are people with a hearing loss. So we know that in the global population. But imagine if everyone around the globe with hearing loss were connected. Imagine, let me see there, that would be 72 million people, I think, who had hearing loss around the globe. In addition, we've got the people who use sign language, and then we've got other people with disabilities that we could connect with, and we have other allies that we could connect with. And so as these separate groups connect with one another, what an impact and what a power we could have. We could really amplify who we are as deaf people. It'd be very powerful. Even though we're a minority group, there is a majority in if we connected with one another. His brother's hearing, and they're twins, and the twin brother went to the same local school and then went to a college in upstate New York for his college degree and then came back home. So that's what that hearing person did in that family. Now, the deaf brother traveled the world, went to RIT, went to camps in different states, have had a large community experience. Now, do you remember Dancing with the Stars a couple of years ago when Niall DeMarco won? It really depended on the number of votes that he got. I believe that the deaf community had a major impact on his win because we're using our social media presence together as a group-centric culture to feed into those votes, right? And so we can really change the world. So here's a theoretical discussion I'd like to throw out, if you don't mind. So, do you think you live for a story, or does the story tell how you lived? If you think about Field of Dreams versus happenstance, Field of Dreams is being purposeful and making a plan and proposing an idea. For example, I want to create that perfect waterfall in Hawaii versus happenstance. Oh, there was my bus monitor, this guy who's sitting over here working today at the presentation. So, which is it? Do you live for the story, or does the story tell how you lived? Both are beautiful, and each are important, but I encourage you to live your story and let your story create opportunities in your life. It's the life is short, but art is young. I don't know if you've heard of that, but we need to take advantage of whatever is happening in the present moment, because I want to mention that I did this one project that in the category of I live for a story. And my daughter, who's deaf, I've mentioned that. I, again, being a mom of a deaf child, trying to figure out how I can socialize her. Most of my friends had hearing kids, and so I wanted to figure out how I could, engage her in fun activities with deaf kids. And so we decided to start having tea parties for her when she was 2. And on Valentine's Day, 3 little girls came over and we dressed up and had tea parties. And we did that every year annually on Valentine's Day. This year is the 10th anniversary. And so, we would start with a fashion show and just be a lot of fun. And it evolved from one thing to the next over the years. And then as my daughter became a teen or a tween last year, 11, 12, 13, I started to think, I want these tea parties to have a larger sense of purpose. I want to include the concept of love and maybe self-love. And so I talked to them about it, and we developed the idea of why don't they develop a care package for survivors of domestic violence in the DC area, because it really is a big challenge for people in that community to really love themselves, to have that concept of self-love. They've left a very difficult relationship, and the idea of self-love is just difficult. And so thinking about that, we developed this kit, and then we talked about, the kids wanted to be involved, and they collected donations of toiletries, and the artist made some keychains, and some parents said, oh, I want to make sure they have Starbucks gift cards. And so we got a whole host of donations to fuel this self-love project. And this is a picture of people putting it together. And so that's us creating a story, right? But what was beautiful about that story we created was the woman, she was the director at that time in there. After we dropped off the kits, after seeing her about 2 weeks later, I bumped into her after a school function. I really had never seen her before, and then I bumped into her again like 2 weeks later, and she said, oh, I just want to let you know, we just gave our last bag away, the last kit that we had. And she said the person who received that donation was part of the human trafficking. She was stolen from Africa, forced here to America, worked basically as a slave in the U.S. Deaf. She was a deaf person, deaf African, had been abused. And she got this donation, this care bag of self-care and self-love and of hope. And it was a simple thing. It wasn't in the plan, but that's why it's so important for each person to create and to share their own story, to find the joy, that song in your heart, and to make it real. Because there will be secondary and tertiary consequences that are positive for the world in that story.
So that's the beauty of having this opportunity. You saw the picture of my daughter as a baby, and now looking at her now, I am really grateful for her as a gift, because the series of stories I learned from her gave me strength. And so through stories that you've lived and that you will live, you will gain strength. In Austin, Texas, they have something that they do is live a great story, or be the hero. Also, be the best hero possible. Be the hero of your story. Spread inspiration. Small habits spark growth. So there's no finish line. A great story is a love story. Pursue something great. Fall in love with your life and share your story. So this is now part of my history. I will remember your faces. And as I'm out on my speaking tour, I just remember there are different ways to share your story through art and through passing down of stories. So when you share your story, tell it well. So I have this word, vorce, which is voice and force combined. So tell your story well. I have a gift for you. So you can keep the free gift as a reminder to yourself to share your story. And if you have a beautiful moment, you can keep it in your pocket or you can go on and share the love. Thank you.